Okay, there's just a couple more things I want to spend a bit of time talking about. So there are 4 R's. We've been talking about rate primarily. So there's place, time, and source. I'm going to talk a little bit about source and time. Placement isn't such a big issue in potato production because most of it ends up in the hill anyway in our production systems. In Europe, sometimes they do a bit more broadcast nitrogen, and we might want to talk about place, but I think in many cases that place isn't as much an issue as source and time. So in terms of right source, what we want to do is we want, I guess important in both terms of source and timing, there's an interaction in that what we're trying to do is we're trying to choose a source and a time of application that's going to provide the nitrogen at the time in which the plant needs it and not allow it to accumulate when it's not needed. So that's why I'm not very happy about pre-plant nitrogen applications, particularly pre-plant of something like ammonium nitrate. Because from the day you put it in the soil, you've got nitrate that's just sitting there waiting to be lost as soon as you have a rainfall. And I understand there's reasons why people want to do pre-plant application, but I think those are situations where you need to consider a source where we're protecting the nitrogen for a period of time. One obvious way is an ammonium-based source, because at least you have a few weeks where that ammonium is being nitrified to nitrate before it becomes more potential. There's more potential for loss. But there's also a number of other right source type of options where we're using things like urea to supply the nitrogen, and there's a period of time that it takes the urea to be converted to ammonium and then to nitrate. And we can also use some inhibitors to block some of those processes. So some of the things that we're seeing appear more and more in the market, well, one of the things is we're seeing more urea being used in PEI. And so that gives us a little bit more time before, not much, a little bit more time before we have nitrate formation. So urea dissolves in water, and then that urea is acted upon by an enzyme called urease that's present all over the place in the soil. So it's present in the soil. That urease enzyme produces ammonium carbonate, and that ammonium is then acted upon by the nitrifier population and is converted over about a 2-week period to nitrate. So there's about a 14 to 20 day period where urea becomes nitrate and has a high potential for loss. Almost all the losses from the nitrogen cycle occur from nitrate. Fortunately, that's also the most available form of nitrogen to the plant. So we don't really have the option of shutting down the nitrate pathway altogether, but we don't want too much nitrate. We want enough nitrate to accumulate, but not too much. So we have some opportunities in terms of inhibitors, different kinds of philosophies of inhibitors. So we can inhibit the urease enzyme itself. We can use a urease inhibitor. And there are products like Super U where the inhibitors are combined with the urea source that inhibits that transformation from urea to ammonia. We can also use nitrification inhibitors that inhibit the conversion of ammonium to nitrate. And NSERV is an example. Steve, what's a product that has a nitrification inhibitor in it?
Agritane, I think.
Agritane, right. Another approach is we can actually delay the dissolving of the urea prill. So for urea to be acted upon by urease, it has to become dissolved in water and move into the soil where the urease enzyme is. Well, we can coat that urea particle with a semi-permeable plastic coat that slows down that solubilization process physically rather than chemically. And that's the principle behind a product like ESN, environmentally spark nitrogen. The coated product simply delays the solubilization of the urea. The challenge is you want to make sure that the profile of nitrogen release and availability matches the profile of the plant nitrogen demand. And that's the challenge. Is some of these products are designed for warmer climates, some for cooler climates. And the other challenge is that the other thing that could delay something like the dissolution of urease is dry weather. So if I've got this nice protected urea source and all of a sudden it gets dry, it's still staying protected. And once it gets wet again, we just started the sequence of nitrogen release. So what can happen is our nitrogen release can occur at the wrong time because of unforeseen climatic conditions. So there are challenges with these products, but there are opportunities as well. And I think what's occurring within the regions, we're testing out some of these sorts of products. So the other opportunity is there's increased interest in foliar application. Foliar application is of interest because we're directly applying it to the plant. We're not involving the soil, so there's less potential for loss via soil processes like denitrification. We also can apply it later in the season, so we have an opportunity to influence the timing of application so we can better supply the nitrogen when the plant needs it. So there's some opportunities there in terms of the application. So that's another right source opportunity.
What's your opinion on the foliars, Dave, and how efficient are they?
I don't know how efficient they are. I'm going to show you some slides about foliar urea, feed-grade urea from an experiment that we did based on some of the feedback I got from you guys years ago. I can comment on that. Steve, do you have some comments on the efficiency of the foliar ureas? Or foliar products?
Really only worked with one, and that's SRN product, the slow release. You'd work with it as well. And you know, you can look at the label and calculate via the label how much nitrogen's in it. But bottom line, we've used SRN to top up nitrogen in potatoes. According to the label, we've used a lot less than we would have on the other side, where we might have spread 180 pounds of AN or something, and we're getting equal or better crop response. So you can have all kinds of people debate which is best, whether they're snake oil or not. But I've got a lot of time for that product. There's other products out there too. I just don't have any experience with them.
So we have source options in terms of enhancing synchrony. We also have some timing options, and one of the ones that, so all of our different inhibitor enhanced efficiency products affect timing and have to be considered. But we also have this opportunity of split application. And this is one that we were looking at a number of years ago and from an environmental perspective in terms of N2O emissions. And we actually found that split application dramatically reduced N2O emissions, but only in years where there was a period of high rainfall between planting and hilling. So not all years, but in years when there was high potential for loss. And that was in terms of N2O emissions. The challenge was even in those years, though, we didn't see a big yield impact. So there wasn't a big yield benefit of split application. And so I guess that's a question for you guys, is that theoretically, split application is a good idea. You're not putting nitrogen on and leaving it when you don't need it in a form that's susceptible to loss. When we were hilling and planting were separate operations, there was an opportunity when you're going into hill to put some nitrogen on and put it in the hill, and therefore it wasn't a big additional field operation. But now increasingly, I think planting and hilling is occurring as part of the same operation. There's less opportunity for split application. But how much interest is there in split application of nitrogen? Are you guys doing that?
Yep.
Does it make sense to you from a yield perspective? You're seeing a yield benefit of that, or increasing in efficiency? I guess that's the question is we should be asking: are we increasing our efficiency by doing that? Theoretically, we should be. We should be reducing our nitrogen losses. We should be increasing our nitrogen use efficiency. It should make sense economically as well. But I don't know if I have the data to show that specifically in terms of split application alone.
What about pre-plant instead of post-plant?
I just don't like the idea of pre-plant because why? But that's a scientific perspective, not an agronomic. Why would you pre-plant?
With a one-pass hiller or one-pass planter with a hiller, your options of splitting, as you said, are gone. So the other option is to put some on and pre-plant.
Splitting has an advantage when you're splitting later, not earlier. So putting it on earlier, other than with the planter, you may have some limitations as to how much you can actually put on, depending on what your blend is. So you may be limited in the amount you can put on simply because you're putting on some salt issues.
So when you're considering pre-plant, are you considering, I'm not sure what John's saying with pre-plant, when we pre-plant the same day?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not, no, that's
Just broadcast.
I mean, a period of time.
No,
No.
I'm saying pre-plant, but we're not putting it all down the tube, I guess, in the planter. We're putting some on prior to, and then
It's getting in the hill?
It's getting in the hill.
I don't have a problem with that. Some people are interested in doing as a separate operation somewhat earlier, and in that case, I'd say that would be okay if you're using an increased efficiency product. But if you're putting ammonium nitrate on, days or weeks before you plant, that just seems like that's risky business. Like, why do that?
It is ESN, and we found that some of this, there's very limited data, but what we did found is that pre-plant ESN ends up releasing similar to a post-plant ESN. Do you have any experience with that?
Well, my only suggestion is that might be due to moisture. I don't know.
I think it was, so
Yeah.
putting it on ahead didn't seem to make much difference when it was that specialized product.
Yeah, if you're doing an enhanced efficiency fertilizer, I think pre-plant might make more sense because you've already got something built in there that's going to deal with the timing of release.
Right.
Okay, and in fact, you might have a product where you need to put it on a bit earlier because the timing's a bit late for when you need it. But I don't know with ESN how much choice you have in terms of the polymer coating. They used to have some customizable products, but do they have that anymore?
So, Agri maintains its temperature-based release, not moisture-based release.
Well, it's probably both, but because you have to have moisture to have it released, but it may be primarily temperature. The other split application opportunity that's kind of interesting is foliar urea, and I think, again, you guys have had some experience with foliar, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a trial we did with Judith a little later. But Stephen has been doing some work with Fertilizer Canada and as part of 4R Ireland, and we've been working with him over a number of years doing side-by-side comparisons of grower standard practices and a suite of 4R practices. That some are source, some are time, those sorts of things. And he's generally finding no yield penalty, a yield benefit for the 4R practice, safe to say?
Yeah, and crop value.
And crop value. But we're also, in terms of residual soil nitrogen, we're seeing a decrease in residual soil nitrogen as a result of the 4R practice, suggesting we are increasing our efficiency by nutrient use. We're getting the same yield, but we're leaving less nitrogen in the field. Not a lot less, but that's also because the nitrogen rate differences weren't so great in these comparisons. We weren't really...
In most cases, we're not changing the rate.
Yeah, so we're not
Most
trying...
10 pounds maybe.
We're not really trying to crank back on the nitrogen. We're trying to just deliver it more efficiently. But we are leaving less in the field, which is interesting. Here's a trial I want to talk to you about because it's one that makes me scratch my head. And so years ago, I was giving nutrient management courses on the island, and some growers said to me, "Oh, we put feed-grade urea in our spray tanks, and we put them on, and this is the practice we do." Primarily to get plants through periods of dry conditions. I thought, oh, well, that's kind of interesting.
By the toadful.
What's that?
By the toadful.
By the toadful, exactly. Well, that's kind of interesting. That's a really innovative way of splitting your nitrogen. And I'd say, and of course, you're considering that as part of your nitrogen program? Not so much. Not so much. So I said, well, maybe we should. Maybe there is an opportunity to consider that as part of the nitrogen program. And use that as just a 4R practice. So Judith Nirniza had a nitrogen response trial going on at Harrington, and so I said, "Hey Judith, let's add a few treatments to that trial." So she had a standard nitrogen response trial: 0, 120, 150, 180, 240, and we added a couple of treatments. One, we took the 150 nitrogen trial that she had, planting that she had, and we added an additional 30 kilograms of foliar. And then we took a 180 and added an additional 30. So that total of 180, a total of 210. So we have numbers that we can compare that to. No yield difference. But in fact, no yield difference for anything more than 120 kilograms. That's what surprised us. We thought we'd be seeing a sort of a nice curve like this, but we're seeing a curve much like this. Anything more than 120 didn't result in an increased yield. So the next year we added another treatment. We said, let's get silly. Let's only add 60 kilograms of nitrogen and 30 kilograms of foliar. So a total of 90. Still no yield difference. There's a little bit of a drop. It's not statistically different. A little bit of a drop. But not the kind of drop that we'd expect from cutting the nitrogen program in half. So this is too good to be true.
And those were different types of years too. Like some of those years were, you know, lots of rainfall, and then 2017 wasn't very much. So.
Yeah. So when we saw this the first year, oh well, next year we'll sort this out. This will get fixed up next year. Oh wait, same thing. Oh, it can't happen 3 times. It keeps happening. So I believe it. So I immediately try to say, well, what's wrong with this story? This is Harrington. So pretty fertile soils, pretty high organic matter. We're not fully crediting the organic matter, so that's part of the story there.
But by pretty high, like 3 or a little less than 3 high.
2.8.
Yeah.
So 2.8. Oh, we got this nitrogen soil test. We'll explain this the nitrogen soil test. Sort of, kind of. It came out a little bit higher than normal, but not through the roof. So we don't think it's solely about nitrogen mineralizing capacity. It was suggested in the last session that maybe this is simply reflecting the higher efficiency of foliar urea supply. So in a situation where the plant needed nitrogen, like when we added this 60, it probably needed nitrogen, but when we gave it as foliar, it was efficient enough and at the right time that we compensated for any issues in nitrogen depletion or nitrogen, lack of nitrogen in that crop. Don't know. But I wanted to present this to you guys and saying, what do you think about this? 60 kilograms of nitrogen plus 30 in 6 foliar applications.
So is it just the red bars that have the foliar?
Yeah, they're just the only difference is that they have the foliar, the rate listed plus 30 of foliar.
So what was the fertility on the rest? Was it all in granular?
All granular planting. This had granular planting of 150 and 180 and 60. So they all had the same at planting regime, just different rates. And the red bars had an additional 30 kilograms of N foliar applied, 6 applications of 5.
And what was the economic analysis on it?
I don't have that. You know, it's about it's totally
Keep doing
valid.
that to you.
I know. I'm
The economic analysis is that you get the same yield with 120 rate of N rather than 240. That's pretty.
no, 90 rather than 240.
Yeah, but okay, what is the? I can't see the yield numbers over there.
And then I don't know whether I think this is marketable yield
Tons?
What if
in
we
tons
have
per
a-
hectare.
Tons
So
per hectare.
the yields are
40 tons per hectare is about 350, 100.
so these are averaging about 50, 40, 30, 40. So these aren't bad yields. These are good yields.
So is that just the common feed grade urea that most people use, or what?
I think it may have been a commercial, a chemical urea source. So it's probably, I don't know whether it was feed grade urea or not. It might have been. I'm not sure that's going to make a big difference, but
And it was 5 kgs
per spray for 6 sprays. 5 kgs per hectare.
We can start talking pounds per acre for it.
Just multiplied by 0.9.
Yeah,
Yeah, 0.9, sorry.
they're close.
Yeah.
Not
But
far
that's
off.
it was always recommended, you know, go over 2 because you
Burns the crop.
burn. So does that not happen?
No,
This was
no
spread over-
pound?
This was spread over 3 times, right?
6 times.
6 times, so they did 6 1 pound.
No,
6.5 kilograms.
5 kilograms, so 4 kilograms. 4 pounds.
4 pound.
So 6
Oh,
4
4
pound.
pounds every time.
4 pounds at a time.
They didn't jam the sprayer up once.
Oh,
That I know of.
Not that it's normal, anyway.
There's been I don't know if it's true or not, but a belief that foliar urea is related to the jelly ants as well in certain conditions.
But we were talking about that in an earlier session, and that may be because when you're doing this, put 180 and foliar,
Yes.
you're getting a lot of nitrogen around. So that might not be about the foliar, that might be just the amount of nitrogen.
Well, we also had the theory that we use urea in dry weather to help carry the crop and
Right.
maintain itself until the weather improved and the moisture came. And then all of a sudden, all that foliar urea was sitting there waiting to go to work. And that's what Vernon's saying about maybe some other issues that came about with certain varieties. So
Well, that happened this year, but the main driver of jelly ends is the hot soil temperature back to initiation. That's the main driver. This might not have helped you.
So Dave, you figured your shed counts that the urea's not working, but what about the other story there? Did you got that figured out yet? You can't-
What do you mean the urea is not
The
working?
90 versus the 240, like are we gonna, you're not seeing a yield, no yield response there in those different.
So I think it might, so there's two possibilities. We're underestimating the soil end supply, and basically, anything over 120 or anything over 60, remove nitrogen as a limitation, because this was so rich a soil. I think that's a little hard to believe. The other option is that the efficiency of the foliar urea was sufficiently greater than soil applied end sources that it
30 kilograms of N from urea isn't equal to 30 kilograms put in the ground.
right.
You didn't see a yield difference in all those blue bars. There's no difference.
Exactly. I know. So
So that's not.
yeah, that doesn't explain the blue bars. You're right.
Right.
I think yeah. So at this site, I can't justify applying more than 120 kilograms of N.
So, but people keep talking about the efficiency of the urea uptake. How effective is it? How effective can a plant material absorb it as opposed to a root system and uptake?
Oh, no, urea can be transported
It's
across the leaf.
effective.
Yeah.
It's no, and it gets to where it needs to go. It
It's
moves to
actually-
the tubers.
Yeah, I think it enters the plant system fairly effectively. Nitrate's a problem because nitrate has to be converted to an amine form, and that's a very energy-intensive process.
Okay.
So the plant actually transports the nitrate up to the leaf where there's lots of extra energy, and it converts that using the nitrate reductase enzyme. That takes a lot of energy. That's a lot of effort. The reason why the plant uses primarily nitrate is it gets it free with water.
Right.
So as the water's coming
Sure.
in, there's no, but this urea actually can be transported right across the leaf and go right into
Okay.
that same biosynthetic pathway. And so the leaf is sending all the nitrogen down to the tuber anyway. And this is just going to the main factory.
Maybe unlike some other liquid nitrogen products that are applied foliarly.
There
Because
probably
it
are
depends on
amino
the-
forms. I don't think there'd be any nitrate applied as a
You don't
foliar.
think they'd be okay?
Although I don't know if it matters.
Yeah.
It's a good question though. I think they'd all be ammonium or I would be a little worried about too much ammonium because it could be ammonia. You could get, one of the damaging aspects of ammonia is cell wall damage, cell membrane damage.
Yeah.
So a urea might be less damaging than an ammonium-based, like ammonium sulfate or
Right.
something like that. Guessing. Anyway, this is one I wanted to throw out just to get you thinking, because maybe we should be trying more of this in different fields and doing somewhere other than Harrington and seeing, does this work? Because if we could literally cut our nitrogen application. Now, I did this to show that we could reduce nitrous oxide emissions by applying it to the leaf and not involving the soil, and that would be a perfect way to minimize N2O emissions, increased in N2O emissions with the urea application. Because what happens is when it does rain, we're getting urea right on the surface, we're getting ammonium right on the surface, and I think that we're getting increased N2O emissions. So we didn't achieve reduced N2O emissions. We did decrease the amount of residual soil nitrogen in the fall in these plants as a result of the urea application.
If you look at most of the blue bars, with the exception of the 240 rate in 15, it looks as though there's typically a trend of decline after somewhere between 120 and 150 units, which maybe you're applying too much to not allow the crop to naturally senesce, thereby reducing your overall tonnage, your maturation curve. So, I mean, that could be an explanation. Too much fertility, you prolong the life longer than it naturally has, and it actually negatively impacts your results.
Yeah, it could be. And again, I think that's saying we're getting an end source.
Too much.
We're getting
too much.
We've got an end coming from somewhere here. Anyway. So, I just wanted to review this sheet, talk about the existing tools we have for trying to calculate our various end inputs and critique a few of those. I do think it would be useful for us to start calculating what our nitrogen use efficiencies are, even if we're just using that inputs versus outputs with the IPN and I calculator. Although I would like to see us measuring more stuff, measuring mineralization potential, measuring residual soil nitrogen in the field after potato production. I think it's a good challenge for us, and we're very much trying to implement this kind of a system in terms of giving you tools to increase the efficiency of your nitrogen use. I just want to spend the last minute talking about a project that we're doing with that actually the East Prince people are doing, that I'm somewhat involved in, but I thought you should be aware of. You probably are all aware of it, but I'm going to show you anyway. So this is about the field edge and opportunities to reduce environmental impact and generate some services on the field edge. And so what we're looking at is the establishment of willow plantations in riparians, are actually adjacent to riparian areas, because technically we can't do anything in the riparian area. It has to be adjacent to it. But I think if we could demonstrate that this was a non-invasive, maybe we could move that into the riparian area. But what we're trying to do is demonstrate the opportunity for putting willows in those environments to absorb nutrients, reduce rates of water flow, produce some above ground biomass, some below ground biomass. So these are the signs. There's what, 18 sites across PEI?
There's supposed to be 12 in this project, but we'll have 16 at the end. 16.
So we're eventually going to have 16 sites to demonstrate this and evaluate it. In terms of the project objectives, we're looking at above and below ground carbon storage. So root biomass, producing soil organic matter, sequestering carbon, but also some above ground carbon storage in terms of the willow plant. That could be as biomass production, potentially as a biofuel, or maybe as a soil amendment. We're looking at the economic cost benefits of that, so we're going to have an economic analysis part of that. Use the opportunity to harvest those wood chips as an alternate energy source, potentially, or as a soil amendment to enhance organic matter content. One of the things we'd like to, one of the questions I have is whether it would be better to apply that material as wood chips, composted wood chips, or biochar in terms of building soil organic matter. Remember that we have really low cation exchange capacity. Is there an opportunity to dramatically enhance our cation exchange capacity by using these as amendments in potato production systems? And we also want to look at the operational constraints. How much of a pain in the neck is this kind of a process? Is it worthwhile? So we're doing this in producer fields by establishing these strips where we have grassed controls and willow plantations. In some cases, there's a couple of different willow varieties. An additional project that's going on in parallel to this is one being run by Yifang at AFC, where he's looking at a couple of BMPs, one of which is the addition of various rates of willow chips to soils that are going to be growing potatoes, to see whether that works or not. Is that a problem? And also, he's also looking at some rotational crops to control disease. So he's very interested in reducing nitrate leaching and greenhouse gas emissions, soil organic matter accumulation, soil health, and controlling some soil-borne diseases. So talk to Andrea about these projects. I think they're interesting projects. They're going to generate some interesting data, and there are ways in which we can use that surrounding land to also deliver some environmental goods and services, and increasingly we're going to be asked to do that. Okay. That's all I had to say. I just also want to acknowledge the various people that I've worked with and have funded me over the years, and I would welcome your input, either today or send me an email or give me a call. I think your views on this are really important, and that's all I have to say.